We got cool jobs. We do cool things. Our work should be magical. Welcome to STEMdentity. I'm your host, Anna Hodgshire. We work really hard and our jobs shouldn't suck. Let's dive in. Do you ever find yourself just cruising along, say your boss, your advisor, supervisor, whoever, they handed you a task or a project and you're working, and it could be something that's taking you hours, days, weeks, months to complete. And at some point, you have the thought pop into mind, why am I doing this? Why does this matter? I would say that those moments are a bit of like a red flag moment for us, where when they happen, that's a sign that you've lost track of your identity that you care about in the moment, the identity of this project, why you're doing the work you're doing. And I think that's actually incredibly common and also a bit of a crisis, right? That loss of identity means that you don't actually feel like you're showing up and doing something valuable in what you're doing for work. So, of course, you're going to struggle. Of course, it's going to be a bit of a grind coming in day after day after day, doing something that you can't even remember why you were being asked to do this in the first place. Or maybe you do understand why you're being asked to do this in the first place, but you don't really align with it. It doesn't match your values. So today I want to take a little step back and talk more on why I started this podcast of, why do we need our own STEM identities? What's the value and who is this podcast for, ideally? So I have a point of view. It's actually two point of views, really. Part one, we are all scientists, engineers, and artists. And part two, we can use this innate curiosity and creativity to keep pointing ourselves towards the life we want. So if you're listening to this, chances are reasonably good that you saw the word STEM or you saw something in the episode title or the SEO or whatever that made you think, okay, I am a scientist or engineer or mathematician, or T stands for technology. And I don't really know anyone who calls himself a technologist, but if you call yourself a technologist, awesome. Drop it in the comments. I want to meet you. Say hi. So for all of you, you're probably listening, you're going, yeah, I totally identify as a scientist or an engineer or maybe both. Some subset of you probably have some creative pursuits that you really love. So you can probably see yourself as a bit of an artist. Perhaps you do music or art, drawing, etc. So maybe you're thinking, yeah, all right, part of my identity is as an artist. It's not necessarily tied into how I am as a scientist and engineer. Maybe it is. Maybe you think, yeah, I have some creative things that come out in my art that also come out in my science and so forth. So I don't think I have to work too hard to convince you all that we're all scientists and engineers. Maybe a little bit more convincing on the artists, but think about how creative you have to be in your job, right? To keep moving forward, you have to have some sort of creative spark. And I would say that's where artistry really comes in. Maybe where this point of view gets more controversial is if I apply it to the whole world. Perhaps not everyone can really identify themselves as scientists, engineers, and or artists. This is a topic for another episode, certainly, but I'll just say briefly here right now to kind of toss it into the back of your mind if you haven't had this thought or if you haven't had this thought recently. I think it's actually doing the world a disservice that we have labeled ourselves, we have segregated ourselves so strongly into these little buckets. I am a scientist. And of course, if you're a scientist writ large, you're not just a scientist, right? You're probably a biologist who studies cell biology, and your expertise is some sort of microscopy. And you can tell that I'm not a cell biologist or my microscopist, because not only can I not pronounce that word, but I cannot actually come up with a more specific example. But here we are. So we have all these buckets that we put ourselves in. Then it makes other people who are not in these buckets maybe feel excluded, like they're not part of it. But I can guarantee you, basically everyone on the planet, you could be a farmer, an accountant, a nurse, a teacher, any sort of job, you're always running little experiments, both in your work and in your personal life. Hey, maybe you feel like you're not getting the best sleep, so you're going to experiment a little bit with changing when you drink caffeine or changing your bedtime or changing the lighting in your room, right? You're doing little experiments. Maybe you got a new kitten. I just got two new kittens. Don't worry, I'm going to talk about them a lot on this podcast. So you're going to get tired of hearing of my adorable kittens, Nix and Knox. We just got new kittens. And right away, we're building little cardboard towers. Like they have all these bought store-bought toys, and yet every cardboard box that comes into the house is now an opportunity for a new cat toy. So we're engineering our cats better lives. And of course, we're all creative, right? Perhaps it is as simple as how you arrange your food on your plate before dinner, because that makes you happy and you think, okay, this would actually look really nice in this bowl. That bowl over there in the cupboard, I hate that bowl. I don't even know why I have that bowl. Every time I pull it out, I think it's ugly and it does not bring me joy, right? So we're all scientists, engineers, and artists. And we can use this innate curiosity and creativity to keep pointing ourselves towards the life we want. And that's where I think identity really starts to come in. And I'd like to break down three common terms and how I view them, how I've heard other researchers and coaches and therapists talk about them. So these three common terms are core values, limiting beliefs, and identity. So core values, I think that's reasonably self-explanatory, right? Values, you could point to any body of research here. I'll point to, for instance, Brene Brown. She has done a ton of work on values. You can Google Brene Brown values. I'll do a link in the show notes. She has a really nice list of values. It's not a complete list of values that I pulled up right now. So I'll just read the first few off of her list. Accountability, achievement, adaptability, adventure, altruism. We'll skip to the H's, humility, humor. We'll skip to the R's, recognition, reliability, resourcefulness. We'll skip to the T's, thrift, time, tradition, travel, right? These are all values. So you can look at a list of values and you probably identify with many of them. And you can also do an exercise where you try to chunk yourself down to just 3 or 5, give or take. Those are the numbers I've heard used before, 3 or 5 core values, right? So for example, one of my core values is growth. I find it very boring to be static. I find it frustrating to not feel like I'm making progress somewhere in my life. I could point to 5 things right now where I feel like, hey, I'm doing all right, but I could be a lot better. And these are the ways that I'm trying to grow to become a lot better in these 5 ways. So growth is really important for me. Core value. Somewhat of the opposite of that is limiting beliefs. So limiting beliefs, you may or may not have heard this phrase before. If you've done therapy, this is something that comes up a lot in therapy. I don't know that it comes up as often just in, say, popular conversation. So I'll read to you a list of limiting beliefs. You can, again, Google this. I'm not necessarily going to link it in the show notes just because there's tons of different lists out there. And I'm not familiar with, there's the Brene Brown and the values. That's a really famous example of core values, but I'm not as familiar with the limiting beliefs research, so I won't try to point you towards any one thing. But I pulled up a list of limiting beliefs, and some of the top ones are, I'm not enough. I'm too much for people. I'm not lovable. I'm broken. I don't matter. I always mess things up. I'm a burden to others. People will leave me if I show the real me. I have to earn love. Need to be perfect to be loved. I can't trust myself. People are annoyed by me. I'm too sensitive. I don't belong, and so forth, right? And just like the core values, there's a really good chance that if you pulled up any list of limiting beliefs and you started to read through them to yourself quietly and carefully, you might start to identify with some of them. Yeah, I am not enough. I am too much, right? These limiting beliefs are holding you back. So how I think about core values and limiting beliefs as they relate to identity is that core values are helping you shape your best parts of your identity, the parts of your identity that you're proud of, that you show up as. For example, I like giving talks. I think I'm a pretty good public speaker, and I have within that the core value that's underlying that is that growth value that I already talked about, where I look at every single public talk I give and I think, hey, Anna, here's the things that were pretty good about that. And here are the things that you could be even better at. You could be more concise here. You could be more clear here. You slightly put yourself down over here and it wasn't helpful. It wasn't necessary. Those kinds of things, right? So I'm using my core value of growth to help shape and continue to push my identity of a good public speaker. Whereas the limiting beliefs, I feel really shape help shape rather the challenging parts of your identity that make it hard for you to keep moving forward, to keep making progress. So we'll take the exact same example of giving talks. When I first started giving any sort of public talk, I was an undergraduate for my final project, and I had a practice talk and I had a public. So my practice talk was for my advisor and a couple of other professors in the department who were going to give me feedback. And then my public talk was, here's my final project to the department in general, whoever wanted to come. And both of those talks were so abysmally bad that I can still viscerally remember just the shame I felt, the humiliation in the moment. I'm talking, seeing people's faces, seeing on their faces this sort of range of emotion of truly, it was mostly empathy. Like, oh my gosh, this poor student is struggling so much. She's so nervous. She's, reasonably composed and confident in other areas of her life because I work with her, I teach her, whatever. But she is just crashing and burning up here, right? They weren't mocking me, they weren't making fun of me, but they were definitely empathetically reflecting the sheer terror that I had for public speaking. So for a little while, I had a limiting belief that maybe not directly on the list that I read off, but something along the lines of I'm a bad public speaker or I'm not enough when I speak. I'm not lovable as a speaker, right? You could always chunk this back down to a more core limiting belief. And so that gave myself the identity of I'm not a good public speaker, right? My limiting belief, I'm bad at public speaking. Identity, I'm a bad public speaker. And I had to face that down and say, no, I don't believe that about myself. I believe that I'm a performer. I believe that I enjoy talking to audiences. I believe that I have things of value to say. I believe that I can get better. I can grow into a better speaker. And sure enough, I've become a better speaker. So core values, limiting beliefs, and identity are, in my mind, a bit of a triangle where core values is pushing you up. Maybe it's not a triangle. Maybe that's the wrong shape. Here we are. We're going to brainstorm out loud together. So core values are pushing you up towards who you want to be, and limiting beliefs are pulling you down away from who you want to be. So maybe they're a bit of a tug of war where ideally your core values are strong enough that they are continually pulling you forward, right? You put all of the very strong kids on, one side of the tug of war rope, and you put all of the small kids on the other side of the tug of war rope, and your core values are the strong kids and they are winning. That is the goal. If your limiting beliefs are winning, then you're constantly starting to shift backwards. You feel like you're stuck or not making progress or even literally moving backwards, not making it to where you want to be. So coming back to identity, I heard recently this saying that I was like, it's an interesting saying. I agree. And it's a little depressing in a way, maybe. The saying is your identity creates your life and that you can't outperform your identity. Okay, your identity creates your life. Yeah, all right. I identify as a good speaker, and sure enough, I'm a good speaker. I identify as a cat lover. Sure enough, I now have 3 cats, 2 adorable kittens, and my delightful, wonderful older cat that I've had since before I moved out for grad school, so about 12 years now. Love cats. I also identify as a dog lover. I have 2 dogs. That part feels really good to me. You can't outperform your identity, I think, is the sort of true but somewhat negative way of saying what I have been saying, right? Where if you have somewhere through a limiting belief or something else or whatever you want to call it, something that is whispering in the back of your mind, hey, you're not really lovable, then it's really hard for you to show up and present something. Hey, I did this research this last week, and I'm going to show my boss this research I did. Or I came up with this proposal, and I'm going to show my supervisor this proposal. If you believe something along the lines of, I'm not enough, I'm not enough, I'm not lovable, I'm broken, I don't matter, it's really hard for you to go to that person and show your research, your proposal, whatever, and show up with this confident spirit of, hey, look at this stuff I did. You have this, smile on your face, this beaming in your heart because you know what you did mattered. hey, look at how good this is. I want to keep pushing it forward. It's really hard to do that when those limiting beliefs are pulling you back. But maybe you have a core value of hope, of pride, of wisdom, understanding, right? These types of core values can start to let you show up. Hey, look at this research I did. It's so good. I'm so excited about this research. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. And this is how I'm going to keep pushing it forward. Imagine your boss or your supervisor is a Shark Tank person. Person is an investor. There we go. Shark Tank investor, right? Okay. Is the Shark Tank investor going to invest in you because you look beaten down, because you look like you don't know what you're doing and you're confused and you're lost and you're scared and you're hopeless and all of these negative things because all these thoughts in your brain are dragging you down and making it impossible for you to shine forward with your core values of wisdom and knowledge and growth? Yeah, it's going to be a pretty hard sell, let's be honest, right? They're going to be like, oh, I empathize with you. I want you to be able to do better, but I'm not buying what you're selling. I'm not buying that this is going to change my life, that this research matters, etc. You come instead driven by your core values with an identity that you are excited about, proud about. Your research is shining through, your excitement, your joy, your vivacity, everything. That Shark Tank investor, your advisor, your boss, funding agency, philanthropic agency, whatever, it's going to say, hey, yeah, cool. I like this. I like you, and I like this. I am buying what you're selling. Let's keep moving this forward, right? So I don't really like you can't outperform your identity. I feel like it puts us in a negative state. It puts us in this sort of like, well, I mean, if I don't really know how to shift my identity, I can't outperform it, and therefore, well, I guess I'm stuck where I'm at. Let's put this in terms that all of us, scientists, engineers, mathematicians, and technologists, can understand, which is that we are freaking scientists and we can change our minds when there's new evidence, right? Your identity is meant to change and grow. So, with that, your identity is meant to change and grow. We were all children once. I'm extremely excited that I no longer identify as a 5-year-old. When I was a 5-year-old, I'm sure I walked around to whoever would listen to me and I'd be like, I'm 5, right? As little kids do, right? They're really excited. They're like, I understand, I don't know how many things children understand about their identity because it's been a while since I've been a child and I'm not around them that much. But let's say they understand at least 10 things about themselves. They understand their name by the time they're 5, we'll say. They understand their name, they understand their age, they understand who they like, who are their good friends, they understand maybe their family has pets, so they understand that they love kittens. Again, kittens are on the brain, right? They understand these things about themselves. And then as they grow and change and understand new things, their identity grows and change and understands new things. And yeah, it's really easy to kind of roll your eyes and be like, yeah, of course I don't identify as a 5-year-old because that's literally just a number, Anna, and it changes. Cool. Totally get you. But think back to when you were a kid and of things you liked that are not this sort of concrete, age related thing that you don't really care that much about. Depending on your age, I mean, that could have been, I don't know. I'm struggling to come up with examples today, apparently, because I'm thinking of examples where I'm like, no, some of my friends are still into that. So I don't want to insult anyone's, things that they're still excited about. But do this for yourself. Think about what you liked as a kid and acknowledge that some of those things you are not that interested in anymore. For example, as a child, absolutely loved stuffed animals. I had so many stuffed animals. I probably had like 50 of them. Now, as an adult, I like stuffed animals. Occasionally, I buy myself one and it really makes me smile. And I have a few stuffed animals around the house. And some of them are from childhood. Some of them are new. And I look at them, but I don't identify as, a stuffy fanatic or something, right? Okay, you get the point. Our identities change. And also, I think that we're not necessarily conscious of a lot of our identities. Let's go back to the speaking example. And I'm harping on this one because I see it a lot in the students I work with. I give the students I work with a lot of feedback around how they speak because I think it's incredibly important to communicate well. I'm going to dig into this later, but again, just tossing out those little ideas, those little nuggets I like to just lodge in the back of your brain so you can think about, and then maybe they pop up another time and you think about it a little bit more. I think, especially in the United States, we are in a communication crisis in science and engineering where a lot, I'm not going to say the majority, but it's probably the majority of students, young professionals coming out of higher education cannot communicate what they're doing for science work, for engineering work, mathematics, etc., in a clear and compelling way to people who are not specialists in their field, in a way that makes that person who's not the specialist, who's listening to you talk about what you do, think, wow, that's really cool. I'm really glad that this person has this opportunity to do this work. I'm not even asking necessarily for you to be able to always communicate, okay, this is the exact practical reason why I'm doing this work. Here's the economic return on value of why this work matters, because that's not the point of all of science and engineering. We know that. I'd say that engineering is a lot more applied and practical overall than science, right? But not everything has to have an immediate return on value. Because I think that without realizing it, many of the students I work with, many of the people I work with, have internalized an identity of I'm a bad speaker. And that internalization is coming from something more fundamental. And I would say that those limiting beliefs are kind of those more fundamental things, right? That are just at the bedrock. You really want your bedrock of who you are to be these delicious, delightful core values that are inspiring and make you excited to be who you are. But in reality, our bedrocks are some mixture of core values and limiting beliefs. And we have to kind of dig down and find those limiting beliefs and do what we need to do to get them out of our system. We'll have episodes on limiting beliefs. I'm really hoping that I can invite some therapists on to the podcast to talk about these things because I have some perspectives on how I've shaken some of my limiting beliefs, but my perspectives are not enough necessarily for everyone to keep moving forward. So don't worry, we're going to bring in resources for that. Okay, but again, so going back to the speaking, identity, I am a bad speaker, limiting belief, something related to I am not enough, I don't matter, when I speak, it doesn't matter, no one understands me, etc. I don't fit in, right? So by having this identity of I am a bad speaker, these people that I work with or observe now have something of a fixed mindset on that piece of their identity. They can feel and say, hey, I feel like I have a growth mindset. And most of us do, right? We're in science and engineering. We have a growth mindset about a lot of things. We say, wow, I'm going to take this class on fluid dynamics because I don't know anything about fluid dynamics, or I know a little bit about fluid dynamics. And by the end of this, 16-week course, I'm going to know a lot more about fluid dynamics. Awesome. Growth, mindset. Boom. Identity right now, don't know a lot about fluid dynamics. Identity in 16 weeks, I know more about fluid dynamics. Unless the class was abysmal in case, maybe you don't know much more. But hey, hopefully it was a great class. That's growth mindset. Fixed mindset is I gave a talk. It sucked. I hated it. Next talk. I gave a talk. I sucked. I hated it. Third talk. Ugh, I'm still bad at this and I hate this talk, right? You are, without realizing it, setting yourself in this fixed mindset where you're not actually growing on how to become better at talking. Okay, who is this podcast for? Right? I keep saying scientists, technologists, engineering, mathematicians, right? And yeah, in the ideal world, everyone who's in STEM might find this podcast and be like, hey, this is pretty useful to me. But in the real world, some of you are going to listen for a little bit and go, absolutely not. And then more realistically, most people are never even going to find this podcast. So one, if you're here, thank you so much. I'm excited you're here. I hope that this is really helpful. I know that this podcast is going to grow and change and evolve, just like I grow and change and evolve. right? I know I stutter a little bit here and there. I know I forget how to say words. That's probably never going to change. Maybe that's a limiting belief. I do struggle with words sometimes out loud. That's okay. I don't mind it. I know that this podcast is going to get better, so thank you for being here at the beginning, and thank you for sticking with me. Hopefully, we get something out of each episode. Who this podcast is for is that I have found in my own personal experience, and this may not be true for everyone, and if it's not true for you, then maybe podcast is not resonating for you. But in my experience, the resources out there are not sufficient to create the safety to continue to grow into the identities that you want to have when you show up in your career to do your impactful creative work that is necessary for this planet. The resources aren't there, right? You might have the occasional one-off conversation that is helpful, that starts to point you in different directions, but very often we are in these power dynamics where we might feel okay about talking to, say, our direct supervisor, or maybe even just a more senior colleague about certain things, but we don't really feel okay about talking about everything. And that's where I think we have to be very open-minded about, hey, what am I struggling with and how can I get that help? This podcast, I'm hoping, is one of the ways you can get that help. I'm also hoping that you can get that help as you need it from other community members, whether it's a therapist, a somatic coach, someone in your organization, someone outside of your organization, mentors, friends, family, etc., right? Reaching out to get those pieces that you need to start creating that safety within yourself, to start creating that resourcing so that you can show up as yourself. And you can figure out, what do I love? What do I like to do? What am I excited about? Why did I go into STEM in the first place? Because I thought I went into STEM to do exciting, cool, amazing work to change the world. And now all of a sudden, my work is just emails and meetings? No, that's horrible. We work too hard to put up with that. Okay. We're not putting up with that anymore. We're figuring out ways to manage ourselves and manage our lives and manage our work so that we can have fun and have a great time in our work. Another reason why I started this podcast is that I feel like a lot of the advice that is out there, and admittedly, I am looking more at, say, the blogosphere, right? Lots of blogs out there. I subscribe to Medium and I've clicked on just the right number of things that Medium daily email digest or however often they send them loves to blast me these emails that were written by people who I believe are dude bro engineers on how to increase your productivity through these simple 20-step process first thing in the morning. And I'm like, whoa, bro, I have a morning routine. I think morning routines are really important. I'm totally excited to talk about my morning routine. And I'm not going to say that it's 20 freaking steps that you have to do every single day in order to increase my productivity, right? I think there's a lot of advice that's just from these dude bro engineers who I don't know if they feel safe or not, but somehow they have taken on these identities of the more productive and efficient I seem, the better I do at work. And maybe this is you. Maybe you're sitting there and going, hey, Anna, that is me. And I think that's great if that is really working for you and you feel happy about that. I think that some of those people do feel really happy about that. And I'm not bashing it at all. And I'm also saying that's not all of us, right? We're not all dude bro engineers. We don't all want to have the maximally productive day. Now, admittedly, I love productivity. I'm going to dive into productivity episodes. I have a lot of thoughts on emails. I have a lot of thoughts on systems, right? I love talking about this shit. And I think it's okay to have an emotion at work and know how to process that emotion. I had a conversation with my boss, sort of in a weird structure where kind of have some bosses and they aren't really my bosses, but whatever. I have people who, in my mind, I just call them my boss, right? All right. So I had a conversation with one of my bosses last week on something. He dropped some information on me that was kind of out of the blue. I didn't expect it. Old Anna, a couple years ago, would have completely freaked out internally, right? Would have kept it cool on the outside, but internal, complete panic. Ah, probably would have been weeks and weeks of panic. Ah, right. All right. Current Anna gets the news, sits there in his office, is listening, reaches for a couple of my little grounding techniques that I really like right now to feel all right in the moment, feel a little safe in the moment. We finish our conversation. I leave the office. Oh, I got parts of me that start just screaming, "Oh my gosh, everybody hates me. I am not enough. I am a failure." Meh, 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 meh. And I'm just like, okay, all right, I hear you guys. Yeah. Yeah, it kind of sucks to learn this. Oh man, the timing isn't great. I'm about to go on a week-long vacation, so I can't even literally do anything about this. But you know what? We don't know until we talk and just take this opportunity as growth, right? Take this opportunity as hearing, hey, you had this suspicion that you weren't doing the best at this part of your job. And now you have evidence that you're not doing the best at this part of your job. But that evidence is still pretty loose, right? You don't actually know the specifics. You have some time. You're going to figure it out. It's a growth opportunity. You're okay. You're okay, Anna. I had to have that conversation. And I'm so freaking glad that I was able to do that, right? Because otherwise, it would have been like 2 weeks of three of my parts or more screaming at me in complete panic about how I am a terrible leader, mentor, blah, blah, blah. Everybody hates me. No, 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 no. And it's like, no, that's not true. It's not true until I literally have evidence that says everybody that you work with hates you. And I don't have that evidence. So I'm probably doing okay. So I want to have conversations about these things, right? I want to talk about the practicals, the concretes, right? Email inbox. Let's do it. How do we get our emails under control? Because it is so easy to just sit there and let the emails come in and respond emotionally because sometimes the news is good, but most of the time the news is kind of not great. Like, oh, I have to do this thing now, or oh, that's actually bad news that I have to respond to. Right? Why are we putting ourselves through this emotional roller coaster? I love doing it too because my brain is a dopamine junkie, right? All of our brains are, especially those of us with ADHD. And it also sucks, right? It makes my days miserable when I just sort of sit there and wait for the emails to roll in. Email inbox, we're going to talk about it. But I also want to talk about these intangibles. How did I sit in that office and get that news that maybe things weren't as good as I thought they were in my team? Maybe there were some issues that I'm not aware of in my team. How did I sit there, ground in, feel okay, walk away, panic a little bit? Yeah, I'm human. It's fine. I panicked a little bit, but then keep grounding in, keep coming back, keep resourcing myself, right? I've learned recently, again, I don't have children, so I'm really excited when I hear these things. I'm like, wow, never knew this, and I wasn't going to know this except for the fact that I listened to other resources and other people talking who have children and who care about these things. So I learned recently that probably not all schools, maybe this is just some subset of schools, but some subset of public schools, at least in the United States, have started teaching their students mindfulness techniques, meditation techniques to help them with their executive functioning. So that, for instance, when it happens to be test day, the kid can sit there for a couple minutes, ground in, regulate, and be okay, and take that test from a really okay state. And we know it without needing to do a ton of evidence. We know in our hearts that we learn best and we behave best and we perform best from a regulated state, right? You get super freaking nervous before a talk. Yeah, your talk's not going to be great. If you can regulate even just a little bit before your talk, and then as you start speaking, you're regulating more and more and more, boom, by minute two, three, you don't feel any panic anymore. You don't feel any nerves. You're just like, yeah, cool. I'm going. I'm performing. I'm having fun. This is cool. I like this. We learn best from a regulated state. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how we regulate, right? So, this podcast is for people who are out there who are saying, hey, I have been working really, really hard because we're all working really, really hard. It doesn't matter what your job is, it is hard, right? Life is not some cakewalk for most people. And some people have found jobs that they really feel are a complete, perfect, beautiful match for them. And those people are rare. And I'm still figuring out how to be one of those people. So you and I are going to learn together. We're going to grow together on this one. How do we keep moving ourselves towards the life we want, right? So here we are. I'm going to do the learn and move your feet, which is my little outro thing, right? I gave you a bunch of things to think about. I want to circle us back down to, hey, if you do one thing out of this episode, how about make it this thing, right? Rather than, oh man, Anna told me 10 things I could be doing, and that's a lot. I'm not going to do 10 things. One thing. We can do one thing. And if you don't remember, no biggie. There'll be a one thing next week. Don't even worry about it, right? So, returning to my point of view from the beginning of the episode, we are all scientists, engineers, and artists. We can use this innate curiosity and creativity to keep pointing ourselves towards the life we want, to keep recalibrating ourselves towards the life we want, to keep vectoring ourselves towards the life we want. And that life includes your work, but the life also includes your personal work, personal life, right? Going back to the example of my boss telling me news that I wasn't expecting and didn't like to hear. Yeah, there was an old version of Anna who would have come home from that and she would have been on a tear to her whole family. And I remember. And maybe I wouldn't have been talking about the specific thing. Maybe I would have just been really mean about other things that had nothing to do with the thing that was really stressing me out. But instead, I come home, I have a conversation. Hey, my boss told me this thing. It's pretty rough. I don't feel very great about it. Here's what some of my parts are saying. I don't believe those parts, but man, they really want to be heard. So I'm just going to say them out loud. Yeah, I feel kind of crappy. I think I'm going to take a bath, And then I was okay, right? I didn't take it out on anyone. It was great. So what's to learn and move your feet? I return to our point of view, right? We're all scientists, engineers, artists. We can use this innate curiosity, creativity, keep vectoring ourselves towards the life we want. Learn and move your feet. I want you to sit with the thought that your identity is meant to grow and change, right? We are scientists and engineers, and we change our minds with new evidence. Do the same for your identity. Think about using a growth mindset. And maybe consider some of the places you feel stuck. Now, in fairness, that was like 4 things. So let me resimplify. I do this all the time. I'm like, hey, I have one thing to tell you. And then it's 4 things. One thing. Your identity is meant to grow and change. Just sit with that thought. Some of you are like, yep, already knew that. No worries. Peace. Did my homework for the week. Check. Awesome. Some of you might be like, hey, makes total sense. Haven't thought about it in a while or haven't really thought about it that way. So just sit with it. See how it makes you feel. Thank you again for hanging out with me. If you listen to this and you're like, hey, I've got a friend who could probably benefit from this or a coworker, it would mean a lot to me if you shared this episode with them. It also means a lot if you review these episodes. I don't totally understand how the algorithms work on the back end, but I'm told by podcasting professionals that reviews actually help kind of pop your podcast up in the charts, right? So these things are all helpful, but you don't have to do anything other than just sit with that thought that your identity is meant to grow and change, and come back next week so we can keep digging in more. Now, I love music, as we have discussed before, and I like to do Song of the Week. And my Song of the Week is actually a classic this week, Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. So we were walking through Old Town of the city I live in last night. It's around Thanksgiving right now at the time of recording, and the Christmas lights were up, and it was gorgeous, absolutely lovely. And we're walking by a parking garage, and I hear this piano music. I think someone was actually like literally hired to just sit there in the parking garage and play, which is just delightful, let's be honest. And they were just crushing it on a really sweet version of Hallelujah, just going all out on the piano. And I'm not going to lie, I've listened to a lot of covers of Hallelujah. I've never really found one I like as much as Leonard Cohen, who did the original. I absolutely love his voice. This song is honestly kind of depressing if you listen to the lyrics, right? It's not a joyous love song that some of the covers might have you believe. I love this song. It's a little bit dark. I'm putting it on the playlist. I'll drop a link in the show notes to my favorite version. My favorite version is his Live in London that I've heard. It's excellent. Check it out. I'm so glad you're here. And thank you again so much for listening. I do want to note that this podcast is not affiliated with my research and teaching roles at Colorado State University, but it is a part of my strong belief that we can all move towards jobs that light us up in our awesome STEM careers, and we need to be able to do that to show up as our best selves and our happiest selves. So if you thought this podcast was helpful, this episode was helpful, I would love it if you'd share with a friend. You can subscribe on your podcast app so you don't miss another episode. If you leave a review, that really helps me out. I really appreciate it. You can follow us on Instagram at STEMdentity. The music was by XS Sass, also at STEMdentity. If you're listening along, you're like, hey, there's some good stuff in here, but I was walking my dog, I was driving in the car, I don't know if I'm going to remember some of the things. I do make a little free show notes tracker that you can go look at every episode, get the key points. That way you don't have to take notes of your own. The link is in the bio. And finally, if you are working on building up your team of support around you and you feel like, hey, Anna might be a good member of your team, you're not sure, I would love to do a free 30-minute work audit call with you. Let's dive into some of your top work blockers, start to make a plan, decide if I would be a good member for your team, longer duration. All these links are in the show notes, and I can't wait to talk again soon.